All right, folks, UGA football live with JC Shelton. Win or lose, we're here. We're going to talk about it. Start with a moment of silence for our fallen dogs here. All right, worst offensive performance of the year for Georgia, by far. Um, let's start with this. I'm not here for the Carson Beck slander. I think he played great. I think he had really good decisions in this game. The pick wasn't on him. The tip pass. Um, the decisions he could have forced balls at times. He didn't. Um, Several balls were thrown out of bounds, which were good decisions. He used his feet well. He not only used his feet well, but he was taking hits and he was delivering blows as well. I mean, he wanted to win that game. Now, obviously, the photo going viral as we speak of him smiling on the sideline, it's not a good look. It's not a good look. But the game itself is not on him. I think he had a good game from a decision standpoint. He had no help. And Georgia leads the country now out of 133 FBS teams. 133. Georgia's first with the most drops in college football. What was that, 28? I think the ESPN broadcast showed it at 27. There was another after that. Those were drive killers at times. The fumbles, Nate Frazier put the ball on the ground twice. One of them was lost. Those decisions on the road and an offensive performance like that against a really good offensive team, I mean, those are critical mistakes. And that's Georgia basically wrote the book on how to lose in the SEC on the road tonight. And you also got whipped up front. Beck was getting hit so much at the end of the game too. And Ole Miss knew that Georgia was going to run the ball. They couldn't run the ball because of the clock and the deficit there. And Ole Miss was just absolutely keying off. Ernest Green was getting his lunch taken. Not having Micah Morris and Tate Ratledge fully healthy is a real problem against a good defensive front like that. And Ole Miss, and we talked about it all week, folks. It wasn't a surprise necessarily to see Ole Miss get after the quarterback so strongly because we talked about that earlier in the week. The stats tell you that the way they've played. But Georgia not being able to block them was surprising. And I think, and the guys and McElroy and on the broadcast, they were talking about how, interesting it was Georgia was getting me up front. When you think about the injuries there and Georgia having to rotate injured guys in and then inexperienced guys in and trying to find a five that can get the job done. I mean, that's a huge part of that, right? I mean, Georgia had only allowed 10 sacks going into that game. Now they allow 5 tonight. And it just happens to coincide with Ratledge and Michael Morris being banged up. Those two things were the same. And that defense, and I think all things considered, played pretty well. They played in the red zone well. Ole Miss was trying to get those two-point conversions. Didn't happen. I think the defense, it did enough, right? But the offense, you got to put up points, baby. Got to put up points against Lane Kiffin and those guys, right? They're going to move the ball. I thought they were going to move the ball at times. I just put my faith on that defense. Obviously, the offense did not play well enough to even make it a game. And that's where you're kind of sitting now and you think about, okay, Tennessee, next week, what do they have? They have a strong front seven, arguably stronger than Ole Miss's. We'll see once we get into those numbers and we talk about it next week. But you have a team that's had played great defense this year in Tennessee. The front seven is the key for them. They get after the quarterback well. Linebackers play well. They're good against the run, decent against the pass, but they get after the quarterback, right? So now you face the challenge of having to face a similar unit next week. So it's time for introspection in that Georgia offense, and Arthur Lynch, former Georgia tight end, he comes on here, he talks about the gotta have it guys for Georgia on offense that you're going to need against the Tennessee defense like this at home in Athens. Guys have to make plays, get separation, right? Catch the stinking ball is kind of the number one task here. And Georgia, despite the talent, and these are really talented players, right? Their drop, is it a mental thing, right? And I think Artie told us the other week that it was. I guess so. How do you fix that? Right? We kind of been asking about, when is that going to be fixed here for Georgia? The drops and beyond the drops, is just getting separation. I mean, this Ole Miss pass defense came in with a 91st ranked pass defense in the country. Plays were there, and Georgia made some. But as far as consistent separation and playmaking from the wideouts, wasn't there. And then he got to a point where Carson Beck didn't even have time to get it off and to let routes develop. They were trying to live with the quick pass game. It wasn't really happening. And Ole Miss was ready for those screens. I'll tell you that as well. And that puts you in a situation where you need to run the ball, and Georgia couldn't run it either. He averaged 1.8 yards per rush. Just lunch taken as far as the offensive line. And that game was weird too, because when it started, right, we get pressure. You get a sack on Jackson Dart. He's hobbled a little bit. Jalen Walker gets a hand in there, tips a pass, Georgia ball. Georgia runs the stinking rock, goes for it on 4th and goal, which I thought was a great coaching decision. On the road, SEC, tough game, talented team. And Georgia gets the ball in there, and it's like, oh my gosh. And then Jackson Dart goes out of the game, and I'm sitting there like, this could get nasty. Because Georgia at that point, and it didn't last long, folks, was winning the line of scrimmage. Went out on defense the first possession, ran the stinking rock in for a touchdown, 4th and goal. Line was working. And then it totally flipped, right? And that was basically, Ole Miss. I'm not going to take all of it away from Georgia and getting that first touchdown in. That was a great effort by the run game. But Ole Miss basically gifted Georgia a short field there, and they did nothing the rest of the game without that, right? 3 points the rest of the game. Consistent mistakes like that. And the opportunity was there in the third quarter for Georgia to get back in the game. Get field goal instead, right? They needed a touchdown so bad there, just flip momentum as well. The crowd was into it, and they can't get past them. Now you're in a situation to where you're probably not going to win this or go to the SEC championship beyond win it because of the 2 losses. And we talked about, hey, A&M's 5-1, LSU it's got 1 loss. You got Texas with 1 loss. And now you're sitting there with 2, and, unless some catastrophic things happen, you're not going to be in Atlanta. So best case scenario here, you beat Tennessee next week, which is absolutely pivotal for the playoff, right? With 2 losses already. I mean, you have to have some major help to lose to Tennessee next week and still get in. Best case scenario is you beat Tennessee. You take care of UMass, do your thing against them. Match up with Tech too. So this is interesting too. When you think about how this offense is playing and what Tech just did against Miami, which we did take Miami on this show. I mean, Georgia Tech, sorry, rather. We got one thing right. Maybe not on the Ole Miss Georgia evaluation, but maybe Georgia Tech and Miami. That becomes a very, very interesting game now, even before Georgia's lost tonight. And we're talking about playoff now other than SEC. So, Georgia absolutely has to win out. And if they're able to, then you're just hoping that the committee, and you're leaving it up to the committee again, right? You're leaving it up to the committee to put Georgia in as one of the 12. You're not going to get an automatic bid. With 2 losses, who knows where you land? It's going to be somewhere near the bottom. And hopefully you host a CFP game. Hopefully. Which, all things considered, and we'll have a little positive note, is that would be awesome for Sanford Stadium. I'll tell you that. I mean, imagine that environment. That would be absolutely incredible. And maybe that's one silver lining out of this whole thing. Seeds is not dead, folks. I mean, the CFP being 12, you went out, you're going to have a win against, depending on what Tennessee does, against the number 7 Tennessee. That could be a little higher next week. It probably will be. Georgia dropping out. Not sure where they're going to be ranked, but Tennessee should be higher. So that's going to be a big matchup as far as in the eyes of the committee, of course. So that would be huge, right? But then you're just kind of leaving it up to committee, which I hate, and Georgia fans should hate, because of last year becoming the first team in CFP history to drop out of the top 4 as the number 1 team in the last week of the season. So you put it in that situation, right? Is putting it in the hands of those guys, the committee, which they say they're objective, and oftentimes they are actually subjective. Let's go to the X machine and see what folks are talking about. You are talking like this team is still the class of college football. Wake up, dude. This is a mediocre team that will be lucky to make the playoffs. Well, they won't be lucky to make the playoffs because they would have to beat Tennessee, a number 7 ranked Tennessee, at home. You're deserving of the playoff at that point, brother. I would suggest you spend your time getting Kirby to actually make a change with the offense. In the end, all this commentary is a waste of time. Well, we love to do it. We love football on this show. We love UGA football on this show. And it's worth our time and our conversations that we have because it's fun. And after a loss, this is what happens. It's always the same. But Georgia has the opportunity to beat Tennessee next week, to beat Georgia Tech, and go to the playoff. That's still the reality. Let's continue. We are simply better. Ole Miss. Hey, props to Ole Miss. Absolutely. I think and what Lane Kiffin has done with that team, after dropping it to LSU, dropping one to Kentucky, a really bad loss, coaching them up, having them ready for this game was really impressive. You missed a couple of receivers. Your leading receiver in Trey Harris. And that defense played amazing. Absolutely. The job they do up front, I think they're going to be a problem for every team. I can tell you that. Maybe the gone are the days of them playing like they did against LSU and Kentucky. So for Ole Miss, this is absolutely major. It might be the biggest win in that program in their history because they're in the playoff hunt now, baby. They're going to be right there probably with this win. If they win out, they'll be in the playoffs. So it's absolutely huge for them. And doing it at home, they rush the field. Also, though, not many ball knowers on the Ole Miss side as far as going and rushing on the field with time remaining. You just wasted our time there. I think the SEC and Greg Sankey are going to find the crap out of them for that. Let's keep it going, folks. What do you think should happen after this season? Well, offensively, in Georgia, here's what they know: they're not great at receiver. They know they don't have much depth at receiver, and there's been a lot of developments that have hindered that. Obviously, off the field being a major part of that. And they're recruiting really well at receiver at a high school, which Georgia hasn't been doing, right? James Coley has come in there in his first season back as Georgia's receivers coach and pulled in some good guys. CJ Wiley just committed this past week. I love what he brings to the table. They're obviously putting a lot of stock into that because they know they need better weapons. So I think that's going to be addressed. And I think, Georgia has done it through the transfer portal the last couple of years as well, adding guys, Dominic Lovett played well tonight. I think, and he's one of those examples. You go out and get more weapons if you can, because that's what, think about what Ole Miss did on defense through the transfer portal. Adding most of those guys that played well tonight and were in Georgia's backfield all night were through the transfer portal. So props to them for identifying that and building that position group to, what we saw tonight. And I think Georgia has to do something similar on offense, and they know that. That's why, like I said, they're putting a lot of stock in high school recruiting for receivers and tight ends. And that's the challenge this year, is just kind of working with that. And obviously that bit you really hard tonight. This is a team who went in and stomped Texas. This is a team who almost put off the best comeback in program history against Alabama. So they have been good at times. I think the biggest thing for me is, can this offensive line get a little healthier, right? Can they find a starting five that they really like against powerful fronts, which that's what you're going to get next week versus Tennessee. So what does Georgia do to address that? I think that's the most immediate thing they need to do beyond the receiver position, which it's been an issue all season, and they've been working it on all season. I don't see how we can expect much improvement, though, at this point, right? We're near the end of the season here, folks. So the trend is not great there. So what can you do offensive line-wise to get healthy and hopefully find a good starting five that can go out and play well against Tennessee? Because that's what it all starts out with. You went up front, folks. They definitely lost that battle tonight, right? So at least give Carson Beck some time. At least give these receivers some time to get some separation. Does this put the nail in the coffin for a Bobo firing? I'm not sure, because of the position issues, right? You lose Brock Bowers, Ladd McConkey, Marcus Rosemy-Jackson. Those guys, they just don't have the guys right now. Offensive line-wise, we already talked about the injuries. That's a big thing for me, and we'll talk more about next week. Does Bobo get leeway? That, I think he might deserve some leeway because of that, because of those issues that are not necessarily on him. He didn't roll Tate Ratledge's ankle. That he had to go through surgery. He wasn't part of those. And I think that's been a huge, huge development for Georgia on the offensive line, which they were playing well when healthy, and now they're facing some issues there with some inexperience. You're having to play, Monroe Freeling and Drew Bobo and those guys. So those are the challenges Georgia's going to be facing this week, right? Is the receiver position again. I think Carson Beck had a lot better decision making today. I think that was evident. Don't think this loss is on him. Offensive line, trying to figure out a starting five who can play well against a Tennessee front that's really powerful. Those things Georgia has to address immediately and quickly, and it's going to come really quick this game in Athens. One of the good things you have here as a Georgia fan is the opportunity to go affect that game, guys. Right? If you have the opportunity to go to watch Georgia play Tennessee, make that home environment, right? Bring that environment that Kirby Smart wants back to Sanford, and hopefully affect this game, because we've seen it happen. Georgia and Tennessee does not win in Athens. They have trouble with procedural things in Athens because Georgia fans love to be loud against Tennessee. I feel like it's a kind of a different environment. So that's one of the things as Georgia fans, you can go and help and affect this game, help this team out a little bit to get that win. Because if you get that win, like I said, that would be huge. Absolutely, you're probably going to be in the CFP at that point, even though if you don't go to Atlanta. So the season and our expectations are skewed from theirs, but fans' expectations, national championship, of course, you have the opportunity still play in that game, right? But you have to be on your P's and Q's starting this week. Absolutely. So that's the challenge for Georgia. We'll see. We'll be back next week to talk about it. Losses aren't fun, folks, but we talk through them anyway. It's just part of the game, baby. Part of the game. We'll be back next week to talk about Tennessee and get into the numbers there and do my best to bring some insight for you guys and research for this one, because it should be a really fun matchup. Hopefully more fun than this one for you guys. Until next week, we'll talk to you soon. Thanks for joining, everybody.